Okay, so welcome everybody. We would like to get started now. It's 1 o'clock. Um, my name is Christopher, Business Development Manager of WeTransform, and I'm happy to host this webinar today on an introduction to transforming data to inspire with Hale Studio. And with me there's Kate Lindegaard. She's the product manager of WeTransform. At the beginning, I would like to give you a brief outlook on the agenda. Now, first, I would like to give you a brief introduction on the company and the WeTransform team and what we've been doing so far. And then Kate will explain to you the basics of Hale Studio. In the next step, she will also show you a live demo. That's the main purpose, to really show how the data is being transformed and how to use Hale Studio. We will shortly summarize what we've seen so far, and then in the end, we will also answer your questions. So, who are we and for whom do we work? The company was founded pretty much 5 years ago. It's based in Darmstadt, Germany, and it's the spin-off of Fraunhofer Institute, which is a big organization in Germany for applied sciences. So it's building the bridge between universities and big corporations. WeTransform has more than 70 customers now and more than 4,000 users. Our focus is on data management services, and we have two products. The one is Hale Studio, which we're showing today, and the other one is called Hale Connect, which is our integrated solution for Inspire and other data infrastructures. Our mission is to make open standards work. That means we help our clients to improve the design and the implementation of these standards. We help them to build effective data infrastructures, and we also invest into our next generation tools like Hale Studio and others that really help users to perform with their tasks. And we also have profound expertise in Inspire and other data standards, and we always help our clients with understanding whenever they have questions on that. Next slide, please. Now, this is what we call a comprehensive workflow for data management, and it really helps to put things a bit into perspective. So we think data management is a lot more than just transforming data, but today we're focusing on the data transformation with Hale Studio. With our platform Hale Connect, we support the entire workflow that's shown here and all the basic functions. However, today we will only talk about Hale Studio in the phase of transforming data. Now there's a big question always to FME. Most of you know FME. It's a product of Safe Software, and we consider FME, in addition to Hale Studio, being the other solution for data transformation. That's why I think it's worth to take a quick look at the comparison between these two. But of course, that's upon your own perception, what you would think of it. But based on what we have seen, we think our FME supports a much wider range of formats than Hale Studio. It can process a wide variety of data like raster data, LiDAR and 3D data and many more. And it's used across a very broad spectrum of applications. So we think of it as the Swiss Army knife. So you can pretty much do everything with that. Whereas Hale Studio is much more focused on the purpose for transforming data and specifically to open standards like Inspire and others. And it has a philosophy of declarative mapping, and which allows you to quickly find mapping solutions. This is very important for more complex data, which really helps users to take advantage from this assisted approach. And you don't need to know that much in advance by using it effectively. So it helps you developing and maintaining your transformation projects. And it also supports what we think is an interactive and easy to understand documentation. That's also very important that you can follow that after. For some, it's important to configure, to provide configuration for other systems like extra server, degree, or GeoServer. And taking all of that, we think of it as the scalpel, so to contrast it a bit to the Swiss Army knife. But again, we will show it today, and so you take your own perception of that. I would like to hand over to you, Kate, to give us a short introduction on the Hale Studio product. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Hi, my name's Kate Lindegaard, and I work at WeTransform as a product manager. So today I'm going to present a live demo of the Hale Studio software, but first I'll go over a few intro slides. So data integration and harmonization. There are a lot of different considerations to think about when you start working on a mapping. So first of all, your data, there may be many different formats and encodings. Your data will have most likely a coordinate reference system. There could be multiple representations of your features. There's different attribute types and values in your source and target data, different classification systems and definitions and semantics. So a lot of things that go into a harmonization project. So why use Hale Studio? Hale Studio helps you to understand the complex data and the data models themselves, so you can load them and clearly visualize them. Hale Studio helps to develop transformation projects in fewer steps. It provides real-time visualization and validation of both your source data and your target data. It's fast and it's open source. So Hale Studio also offers a lot of great functionality that helps you in your Inspire harmonization project. So Hale Studio is preloaded with all of the Inspire schemas, and I'll show you that in a moment when we get to the live demo. So when you choose the schemas you'd like to work with, typically your target schema, you can select from a list of all of the Inspire schemas for all of the 34 themes. They're all there in Hale Studio already. It also comes preloaded with all of the Inspire code lists. As you may know, a lot of Inspire transformations require different code lists, and they're all available for you there as well. I think Hale Studio also has a lot of really great functionality that helps you quickly and easily understand complex GML schemas, even if that's not something that you're super familiar with. So, for example, you can quickly identify mandatory schema elements. So these are schema elements in your Inspire schema that must be present. So the data that is required and that may not be null, may not contain null values. And those you can identify by these red asterisks. So that's one feature I really like, because when you load your Inspire schema, you can see quickly that red asterisks mark properties that are mandatory. They must contain a value. You can also quickly identify cardinality. So you'll see in the screenshot here these brackets that contain numbers. So for example, the first bracket is 0.1. So that represents the cardinality. So here this is a 0 to 1 cardinality. And that's also very helpful because you can see very quickly if you need a value in there. Next. So today I'm going to show you a live demo of Hale Studio, and I'm going to transform a WISE data set, which is an EEA reporting format for water data in Europe. I'm going to transform a WISE data set in shapefile format to an Inspire Area Management Restriction Regulation Zones and Reporting Units theme. That's an Annex 3 theme. So I'm going to show you that demonstration now. So I'll just pull up Hale Studio. Okay, so here we have Hale Studio. For those of you who haven't seen it before, I'll just speak quickly about the layout that you're seeing before you. So this is the default layout. So with many desktop applications, you have a lot of options to customize the layout and see the views that you're interested in seeing. So the view I have open here is the Schema Explorer. The Schema Explorer allows me to see my source And target schema, this is where you typically do your mapping. On the right-hand side, I have the alignment. This will show me my mapping once we get going. You see I have a few other tabs. Transform data, this will show me in tabular format my transform data, and the same for my source data. On the bottom left, I have the error log. I have the properties tab, which is helpful. I can show you that more in the live demo. So these are, but this is all configurable. You can choose to configure your windows in any way. You can always do that by either moving them, grabbing them and moving them, or you can visit the window menu here, click show view, and here you have all of these available to you. So you can open them and drag and drop them around as much as you like. I also like to show you quickly the help. So anytime, let's say we're interested in understanding what those red asterisks were, we could always click on the help tab, click on help, and we have Hale Studio has really great help. Just move that here, so that opens up this window. And for example, you could type in red asterisk, and then we could click here. They found it here, and there you go. Here it's highlighted here in yellow. A red asterisk marks properties that are mandatory, for example. So anytime you're interested in something that you can see, you can always visit the help. And as I said, it's quite comprehensive. And there's also tutorials available. So it's really helpful. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do now as I start the mapping is I'm going to load the source schema into Hale Studio. So to do that, I'm going to click on File, and then I'm going to click on Import Source Schema. There. Now Hale Studio will automatically read and extract the schema from a shapefile. So I'm going to navigate to my shapefile on disk. Okay. So, okay. Navigate to my shapefile. I just have to load my shapefile. So that's a .shp file, and click next and finish. And Hale Studio will automatically load the schema from the shapefile. So here we go. And so this is my file here. This is the format. Now we have currently loaded no data. So this is just an empty schema. Next, we have to load the data. So in order to do that, again, I click File, and I click Import Source Data. Now I'll navigate back to that same shapefile on disk and load it one more time. In order to load my data into the schema. So click Finish. I have to set a coordinate reference system. I'll just take the well-known text. And so now we have the source data loaded in Hale Studio. We know that because we can see this number here, 4. That means that we have loaded 4 features into our schema. So we actually have the feature geometry loaded now. If I really want to check that, a great window we can take a look at is the map view. So I can access that by navigating to Window, Show View, Map, or I can just click on this little map icon over here. So I'll click on, I'll click on the map view, just so we can take a look at, look at the geometry that we've loaded, make sure it's appearing in the right location, and so on. So this data comes from Denmark. It's the river basins of Denmark. There's only 4, and there they are, and they appear to be displaying properly. Now I'm in the map view, but now I'd like to go back to the view that I was looking at. So if you ever get lost in your windows, you can always click on this default button in the top right, and that will take you back to your default window setting. Okay, so now I'm back to my default view. All right, so the next thing I have to do is to load my target schema. So right now I have the shapefile, this WISE data, but I'd like to transform it to the Inspire schema area management. So the next thing I'm going to do is load my target schema. So I'll click on File, Import, Target Schema. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the Inspire schemas are here. So I just click from preset, select. I'm looking for area management. Okay, I'll load this one. That's area management 4.0. Next, okay. And now I'm loading the complex GML schema for area management. So there's one feature type in this schema. There it is, management restriction or regulation zone. That's the feature type. We know that because that little FT in the icon, that is feature type. So I'll expand this feature type. Now we have all of the many nested attributes of complex GML. You can see it's a deeply nested schema in comparison to the shapefile. So now we'll begin with the mapping. So I know that I have two mandatory codeless values in this feature type management restriction or regulation zone. I know that I'm going to require an Inspire code list for environmental domain here, and I also know that I need a code list for zone type here. They are marked with red asterisks, and I know that they require code list value. And again, you could know this by doing a little bit of research in the Inspire specification, looking at the UML diagrams. But let's assume that we know that we need two code list values here. I'm going to load those code lists now. So in order to load the code list and make it available to me to add as an attribute value, I'm going to click File, Import. I'm going to click Code List here. And as I mentioned earlier as well, we can import the code lists for use directly from the Inspire registry. So I'm going to import the code list. I'll click on From Inspire Registry. I click here to bring up the menu. Now I know I'm mapping to area management, so I know the code list will be in here, and I need environmental domain. I'm going to click OK, Finish. Now I also know that I'm going to need zone type. So again, I'm going to go Import Code List from Inspire Registry. I'll click here. I'm going to go to Area Management, and I'm going to take the zone type code list because I know I need to add a code list value from that as well. And I'll click Finish. Okay, so now those two are available for me. All right. The next thing I'm going to do to prepare to do the mapping is I'm going to add two variables to my project. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to Window, Settings, and now I'm going to add two project variables. These are dynamic variables that I set in one place here in the project. I click here to Project, Variables. Now I can add here variables that will be available to me to use in my mapping. I can use these dynamic variables as attribute values, and why they're useful is because you only have to set them once here, and if they change, you just change them then in one place. You just change them here instead of having to navigate throughout your project wherever you've used them and change them all over the place. So if you have something like, for instance, a namespace or something that may change, it's a good idea to add it as a dynamic variable that you can just change. You can save it in one place and just change it once instead of having to do it in multiple places. So the first thing I'm going to add is a project namespace. Okay. And that is going to be wetransform.com. So a lot of the time your namespace will be the namespace of your organization, which is usually set at a and it's something that is known to the organization you're working in. So you can add your organization's namespace there. And then I'm going to add another one, and that's the EUID code list, which we also need to create the Inspire identifier. So, and for that, we need this one here. And this is universal. Every Inspire project has this one. So I'll add that. That's the EUID's value. And then I'll click Apply and Close. So, and I'll show you how we can use those in the project in just a moment. All right, so now we'll get to the mapping. So the first thing that I'm going to do is do a retype. So in order to add my first mapping function, I'm first going to click on my source feature type, River Basin District here, and I'm going to click on my target feature type, the Management Restriction or Regulation Zone. Once I've clicked to the left and then to the right, I click in the middle and I choose the function that I want to apply, choose the mapping function. This is going to be a retype. A retype basically copies over the features from the one feature type to the other. So now what I have here is I have now 4 instances of the feature type management restriction or regulation zone. So we always have to perform that, the feature type level mapping in order to get going. So that's the first step. Now I have to begin transforming all of the attributes. So the first thing I think I'll do is geometry, because right now these 4 instances, they have no geometry, so we wouldn't be able to take a look at them. So I will click over here to geometry, the geometry attribute, and then I will find the geometry attribute here. That's here, click on that. And now I'm going to apply a rename function. Rename basically copies the geometries over. Click next, I'll click finish. Now we can see here the mapping functions that we're adding to our transformation project over here on the right. So we can see I've added a retype, and now I've added a rename. A rename is the attribute level retype. It copies the values, the attribute values from the source to the target. All right. So now I'm going to assign those 2 code list values that I loaded earlier. So the first one here is environmental domain. I know I need to add an environmental domain code list value. It's an href value because it's a URL link. So I'm going to click on href. Now I'm going to do an assign. So an assign is one-sided in that I do not need to click on an attribute in the source data, because I am just assigning each of these 4 features a code list value. It's not coming from the source data. I'm applying a code list value, so I'm assigning it. That's the function I will use. So I'll click here, I'll click assign. I'll click next. Now I'm going to click on this assign a code list button here, and I need the environmental domain code list. So that's, as you saw earlier, I've loaded that in the project. Click OK. Now when I click on the chevron, I have all of those code list values from the Inspire registry available to me. So I know this is that this is the river basin districts. So I need the water code list value. So I'll click finish. All right, so now I have 4. Let's just take a look at those. If I want to see, well, what did I do there? What did I enter there? I see here this assign function's been added to my mapping. I can just right-click on this and click properties. Now if I go down here in the properties tab and I click occurring values and I click this little arrow, now I can see I've added 4 instances of this value, so I can actually see the attribute value that I've added. Okay, so that looks good. The next thing I'm going to do is add the zone type code list. So it's the same thing. I know I need a zone type code list value. I'll click here on href. Click here to add that assign function. Now that comes from a different code list. So I'll click here. I'll click on zone type code. Click OK. Now again, this is a longer code list, although some have hundreds. So now I'm looking for River Basin District. There it is. Okay, now click finish because this is River Basin District data. Okay, so I have now 4 code list values there as well. All right, so now those are added. All right, now the next critical attribute to add, and which is also mandatory in Inspire, is the Inspire ID. So both the ID here and the local ID and the Inspire ID. So the first thing I'll do is I'll add the ID, GML ID. So in order to do that, I will find an ID here. So let's see, local ID here. So I'll take the local ID and I'll click on the ID here. And I'm going to apply the function formatted string. Okay, I'm going to click next. So what we typically do to create IDs that we transform when we do Inspire mappings, we typically use the pattern feature type name underscore local ID. So in this case, the feature type, IDs are an interesting topic, and we have an incredible blog post on the topic which explains the difference between GML ID, the identifier, and the Inspire ID, and suggestions for best practices about how to set those. And we have that available at the end of the webinar. So here now I'm using a formatted string which basically concatenates values together. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding the feature type name underscore local ID. So I'll click finish. Now we have 4 of those. Let's just take a look at those. So I right click properties, and then I'm going to click on occurring values and click here to see. So now that's what my ID looks like. So feature type name underscore local ID. So that looks fine. The next thing I'm going to add is a code space. So I added earlier a dynamic variable, if you remember, and that goes here. It's the EU ID value. So again, that's an assign. I'll click assign here. Next. Now if I, what is it? Yes, if I hit Control Spacebar, then my project variables become available to me. So I know I want that one. Okay, finish. And now that variable that I added at the beginning of the demo, now it is now been used here. It has been assigned, and it will populate this attribute. So that's great. And then for the identifier here, we want to do a formatted string. So first of all, I'll click on local ID, identifier. This is a combination of a few things, the Inspire identifier. So we'll go here. We'll go formatted string. Go next. So what I want to add here is actually the project namespace. So I want to add the project namespace, which was WeTransform. And then I want to add the ID. So I want to add here the project name. So it will look like this. Project namespace, feature type name, underscore local ID, and that's the identifier. Finish. We'll just take a look at that to make sure that it was populated correctly. So again, right click, properties, and that looks good. Okay, so just to complete the IDs here, I'll add the Inspire ID, which is a combination of local ID and namespace. So for namespace, I'm going to add the WeTransform namespace. That's an assign. I'll click assign. Next. Put my cursor here, Control Space Bar, and I can add my project namespace, which again was WeTransform. Okay. In your case, it will be your organization's namespace. And now again, I want to add the local ID. So here, click local ID here. Local ID here. Again, that's a formatted string. Okay, next. And that will be feature type, name, and the local ID. Finish. Okay, so we're finished with the IDs. As I said, it takes some thought to create persistent IDs, unique and persistent IDs. So I highly recommend our blog post on the topic, and it explains a lot of these topics in greater detail. All right, so but with that those are the IDs. Okay, so next I will move on to taking a look at the validation errors that we have now. So as I mentioned before, we can look at the cardinality in the schema. So I can see here if I look at competent authority, there's not a red asterisk, but the cardinality is 1. So in Inspire, it is mandatory to set nil values. So we have to, if a schema element has a cardinality of 1, then we need to set set at a minimum a nil value. So I'm going to do that for competent authority. Okay, so I'm going to set nil reason here. And again, that's when I want to set a nil reason, I'll use assign. I'll click here, click assign. Okay, click next. And I'll say other, oops, unpopulated. Okay, click finish. Okay, and I know that the same issue will occur with legal basis. Okay, so if I click here, I'll set a nil reason here. So I'll click assign. So, and again, you will receive errors if you don't in the Inspire validator, if you don't add nil reasons, if you don't populate nil reason with a value on these attributes. So click that. All right. All right. So so that brings me to the end of the mapping for the moment, but now I'd like to take a look at how we can view a few more things in the application. So you'll notice here that begin lifespan version and designation period, they don't have numbers in brackets. That means that they require exactly 1 value. So in order to have a completely perfect Inspire mapping, we would have to add some information here. But that said, let's just take a look at now the report list here in the bottom function. So you can see here, I have the instance validation is cleared, the instance transformation is clear to have green check marks there. So that looks good. And now I'd like to show you how we can export and validate the XML that we've just created. Okay, so now I'm going to click File. I'll click Export. And I'm going to File, Export, Transform Data. So that is going to allow me to export this transformed Inspire GML to file. I can, upon export, I can add an XML validator. I'll navigate to the location on file where I want to save it, river basins, Inspire, okay, click save. Now I can add a validator. So I'll add an XML validator to check the XML of the file. Click next. Here I have the option to convert my geometries to a specific CRS. So if my data were not in an Inspire compliant CRS system, I could convert them at this point in time. So I'll click that, I'll click select, and yeah, I'll leave it in 4258, that's fine. So my Inspire geometries will now be converted to the CRS EPSG code 4258. I'll also choose to use this CRS identifier. So in an Inspire, it is required to use the http www.openjs.net CRS name prefix, so that yeah, that is what is required. So when I click this, that is the format that the CRS will be added to the GML. So that's what we want. I'll click next. Click next. I'll click Pretty Print XML. Click next, and I'll click finish. Okay, so all validations completed successfully, so do have valid XML. You can also see that here in the report list that the XML validation and the project validator and the GML file export validated successfully. See that here. I'll click OK. And that brings me to the end of the technical demo for today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. I think that's been very impressive. Also, the speed at which you showed, demonstrated the whole process. Yeah, so what we've seen is that that Hale Studio helps to make these data transformations to Inspire easier. And also what you've seen is what the real-time data visualization and the automatic validation of the transform data. I mean, there's a couple more issues, but that's something we consider being most important. And the next slide, I guess, is also relevant. Thank you. Now, when you look for help or assistance in any way, we compile this list of potential resources. And of course, you will get this list when you have access to the presentation slides in a couple of days. So first, there's a product description on our internet site. Then there's a download site, which helps if you want to get started. There's the help function that Kate showed also, and there's the chat function included in that. And for those who are absolute beginners, we recommend exactly this individual starting point that's mentioned here. Also, there's a support forum, a community where you can discuss your questions and also contribute to open issues from other users. There's a list of best practices for IDs that Kate mentioned before. Now there's also the webinar recording, or will be, so it's to be added. And this is all for free. And there's also the possibility, of course, to get a training session. That's typically 1, 2, 3 days, depending on your requirements. You get further information at the link here. And these days, of course, we also provide remote trainings. So that's always a possibility, and that's highly sought after these days. And there's also professional support if you want to get this more information you find here. And if none of this helps, just call me.